It's a 2-minute warning. It being 7:30, I'll call the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education to order. It's Monday, October 23rd, 2017. We're at the Oregon Senior High School Innovation Center. Ms. Wick, would you call, it's 6:30, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney. Present. Ms. Oderico. Here. Ms. Flanagan. Here. Mr. Raymond. Mr. Kraus. Mr. LeBrun. Here. Mr. Zach.
Present. Board has a quorum. I have noticed that this meeting has been appropriately noticed pursuant to Wisconsin Open Meetings Law. The certificates of posting will be with Ms. Wick if anyone wants to examine those. We have an agenda tonight that includes a number of items, and I'd entertain a motion to approve the budget. Got ahead of myself. You can tell I have jambalaya waiting at home, can't you? Yeah, I know. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as posted. There's a motion by Mr. Raymond. Second by Mr. LeBrun. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries by unanimous voice vote. That takes us to Section A, our consent calendar. Is there anything on the consent calendar that any board member wishes removed? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Ms. Flanagan with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Kraus with the second. I don't think there are any contracts there, Jeannie. Yeah, we'll do it, then we have a resignation, so we'll take a roll call vote. And Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan.
Yes.
Mr. Kraus.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Mr. Raymond.
Yes.
Ms. Feeney.
Yes.
Ms. Oderico.
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries by unanimous roll call vote, 7-0. Takes us to agenda item B, communications from the public. The board is established by policy and opportunity for the public to address the board. Ms. Wick, has anybody notified you that they wish to talk to us this evening?
No.
Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to talk to us from the public? Seeing none, we'll move to item C, information items. That's the OEA report. And Laura, you're up. Do you need to plug in? Yeah.
And that's okay.
Can you email them to one of these guys? Who's got Andy?
I can? Yep, super simple. I can just run through it pretty quickly. Just two things. Current happenings with the board tomorrow are our elections, which will include leadership, so the obvious leadership positions and the building reps. So that should be wrapped up here today. And then also in November, we have our recertification vote, which, is the process we need to go through to maintain And the only other thing is we're just working to set our goals for this year. Continued and improved communication between all the stakeholders, so between the OEA, the board, and admin. Assisting in refining the pathways and the professional development process. And then just working for the best possible partnerships between all the stakeholders. So those are our goals for the year.
Great. And Laura, you're at RCI, correct? OMS, yeah. And we had,
Is there something you want to tell me?
no. No, I'm just really confused tonight. That's all on me. But Laura and I had good communication back and forth. She'd like to report at some point regarding the field trips that they've had this past year. And I said, could you hold and wait till we're going to probably talk to the middle school, because that's exciting stuff that we want to hear and we want to put it in the right context. So we're going to hear from you at some later point, and because Brian and I work with our agenda, so you're on our checklist for stuff. Okay, thank you for the report, Laura. Student report, Carolyn, and I got to brag first for you. The Carolyn's swimming team at Oregon defeated Monona Grove, which is a big deal, isn't it? How long's that been?
I don't think we've beaten them by high school for years.
Good. That's great. Congratulations. Carolyn was an integral part of that team that won, so congrats. Okay, and Carol and I have talked a little bit about calendar issues and the role that student council may play. We're discussing that a little bit at, not a little bit, a lot of it, at visioning and school start day, but you've had some conversations preliminary. You want to chat for a little bit to us?
Yeah, do you want me to talk about it during when we talk about the school calendar or no?
No, why don't you talk now?
Okay, so
Yep, we'll pull that down.
Alrighty. So at our student council meeting last Thursday, I sent out a survey to all of them, and it was a series of questions that I had written up about the current school calendars that I know you guys are voting on, and as well as the teachers, and I know the parents are sent it as well. So I gave them the two calendar options. I said, take a look first. I gave them like 2 or 3 minutes to just turn and talk to the people by them and what they noticed, what they thought, what they liked, what they didn't like. And then they took this survey. So they liked B more than A, which to me was, I kind of expected it, because from a student's perspective, especially as a senior, to see that you get out 3 days earlier, I think is interesting to them, and that's cool. And then I asked why they voted for B, A versus B. And the number one reason was because seniors get out early. And they also said that it's more practical for seniors. And then I also asked if they prefer less frequent longer breaks or more frequent shorter breaks, because I know that's kind of something you guys mentioned last meeting. And 71% of them said they'd want shorter, more frequent breaks rather than like a longer Christmas break or a longer spring break. And to me, that makes a lot of sense as well, because it gets tiring to be in school week after week after week and not have a day off. And even for me, like a 3-day weekend is like a good breather. That extra day just gives you some time to, you can get your homework done, but then you can like go do something with your friends or something. That's kind of all I have. If you guys have any questions.
Thanks. We may, when we get to the calendar point, in terms of where we're going forward, or how we're going forward with the calendar stuff, and we'll talk at that time a little more.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the feedback. Moving on to action items D, 2017-2018 budget adjustments. And is that Brian?
I will invite other administrators and Gina and Andy to jump in as well. As you know, Gina led our planning for a staffing request for this year, so Gina prepared most of this report, but I'll give you a really brief overview. As you're aware, the board, we have access to an additional $450,000 of budget authority for this school year. The administrative team met at least twice. It seems like a long time since we've been planning this. It could have been 3 times. And we identified 6 budget adjustments for your consideration. In addition, the board has a couple of other options in addition to the 6 adjustments we've provided. One option, and we built these off of comments that we heard from board members at last month's meeting when we shared a couple of different paths. One is to allocate all the money, all $450,000 to the fund balance. That's not a recommendation we're making. Also, you could remove or change one of the 6 budget adjustment recommendations that you have in front of you, either in terms of amount or content. And then third, you could approve the administrative recommendation as presented. I think everyone's aware of the fact that for 2 years, for the next 2 years, the 17-19 budget, there's $200 per student in 17-18, our current year, and $204 per student in the 18-19 budget. In Table 1, this is just a quick restatement of 3 big budget sources for us, being in the state budget increase, open enrollment, and interest, totaling that $450,000. So that's a glimpse on the revenue side. On the expense side, we have 2 tables that summarize the 6 adjustments. The first adjustment is for an online educator position, which is a 0.5, and Gina's anticipating that in the neighborhood of $45,000. If you went back and looked at information from April when we made the presentation and you approved the staffing report, the online educator was the very next position on the staff, on the priority 2 staffing level. Table 3, these are one-time expenses, so these are expenses that we would put in the budget for this year, but may or may not be in future years' budgets. They're not guaranteed in future years, and we're also not committed to them in future years. You may wonder why we've selected that path. If we, for example, put everything into our current staffing or additional positions this year, that would really make decisions for next year's budget already at this time. And as you know, it's really difficult to add sections or to add classes in October, or actually in late October, when we're halfway through or almost through the first quarter. Going back to Table 3, there are a few items, and I know you're going to be familiar with all of them. First, the late bus for activities. Andy did some work with the principals, and this was a proposal that we had brought earlier in the year. It was close to $100,000. He's been working with our contractors and believes we can run 2 late buses for $40,000. That addresses one of the equity concerns that we've been working on for a few years. So we hope you are super open to that proposal. The third budget adjustment is in the area of technology, and we asked John Tanner to put together sort of a summary. We had a number, if I showed you the Google Doc with all of our requests, we had a number of technology items, and I thought in the spirit of making it easier for the board and to better articulate and get our ideas around it, I asked John to head up. If we allocate $150,000, I'd like John to work with the principals and administrators to identify exactly where we're going to spend that money on technology equipment. Item number 4, I know you're familiar with our playgrounds, and there's 2 playgrounds right now that are under significant improvement, Brooklyn and Prairie View, and I know Netherwood has some plans, and we also have some requests for outside equipment at RCI and the middle school. It has been quite some time that we've used district resources for playground equipment. I'll give you my personal bias. My personal bias is playground equipment that's part of our instructional space. Our kids spend a lot of time outside, 176 days a year. Well, maybe not all 176, but you get the point. And now's an opportunity where we can reinvest and we can partner with our parents. Our parents have done a marvelous job of fundraising for years, and I think it's time for us to make an investment in our playground equipment. Additionally, we're looking at allocating some of the playground funds to reduce barriers and to promote equitable access. If you remember the playground of my childhood, it was asphalt or it was sand, and it was really difficult to get access to the actual playground equipment. Well, now there's technologies that would allow some of our students with barriers to have greater access. Budget adjustment number 5 is in professional development, and again, we had a number of requests here, and I asked Leslie to oversee this piece, and what our goal is to make equity our primary focus of investment, but also to look, you're familiar with AVMR, our math recovery program. We're also looking at, in likely the 18-19 budget, bringing a recommendation for AVID at the high school. So Leslie and the administrators will look at exactly how we're going to allocate those funds out. And then lastly, with budget adjustment number 6, that's the capital equipment budget. And you can see Andy put together some requests that always come in after the budget's complete. And this year we have requests because there's never enough money to do everything that we'd like to do. Requests for additional school furniture. I was over at Prairie View a few weeks ago with Dawn, and I know Andy has taken a look at this. We have a sidewalk that's heaved and has created a safety issue at Prairie View. So while we can't tell you exactly how we'd spend that $40,000, it would be allocated within that capital equipment budget, and Andy's going to head that up and work with the principals so we can stretch those dollars as far as we can. On page 4 of the report, there are 2 questions with respect to other considerations, and I believe Steve raised both of these questions, or if not both, at least one of them. The question was, why not place the $450,000 in fund balance? And Andy's done some work with PMA and Michelle Weiberg. I know some of you are familiar with her. She's worked with the district for years putting together and structuring our debt. One of the challenges, and she shares it just the way it is, in order for us to make a move on the interest side on the rating side to the higher level rating, would likely require an investment of $10 million in additional fund balance. We're currently just around 11 million plus minus, so we would have to bump it up significantly. A question that a board member asked was, what's the cost difference between the AA2 and the AA1? It's about 0.1%. So, not significant on the interest side, but again, if we're borrowing $100 million and we're borrowing that over a 20-year period, it's likely $1 million plus. I will also say, for those of you that were on board when Andy worked on the 2014 referendum, we were able to save about $14 million, $12 to $14 million over our projections. So the likelihood, the biggest savings you'll see is if we sell at the right time, as opposed to an interest rate going down, 0.1 of 1%. Then the next question, and I believe this was Steve's, why not fund the other priority 2 and priority 3 recommendations? Initially, I thought this would be an excellent pop quiz for board members to check on your recollection back to April, and then I realized that would be an unfair test. That would not be a good formative assessment. So I provided it to you. Here are the priority 2s, and again, online educator, as I mentioned, was the first, and then the priority 3s. I can't sit here and tell you that those requests aren't important, because they are, but we would also like an opportunity, as we're looking at the 18-19 budget, to look in a comprehensive way of what we will need in terms of positions, and we don't want to make a decision about a position today that could impact our ability to fund something in the future. So I will look to Andy and to Gina if you have anything to clarify or restate if I made a mistake. Otherwise, we're happy to answer questions, and we may ask an administrator or 2 to jump up and respond to a board question as well.
Okay, this will be an opportunity before we discuss the merits of the recommendation from administration to ask any questions or clarifications that we might have, as opposed to discussion. So I'm going to start with Jeff. Anything that you'd like to ask the administration on the recommendation that's before the board?
Questions? And if these aren't what you were looking for at this time, Steve, please let me know. Regarding the $150K for technology, do we have a pretty good idea, John, of what that might be spent on? Or Andy, or whoever?
Variety of things. Oh, he's gonna get a microphone. So then I'll speak loud. So, yeah, we've got some priorities. We've got some things that are radios that we use for school communication that aren't, they're old. So one of them is radios, communication type stuff that need to be upgraded in a couple buildings. Another one is potentially some of the cameras that are aging. Another one is we were hoping through the previous referendum money to be able to replace a lot of the like 8 to 10-year-old LCD projectors that are in ceilings and replace them with TVs that don't have bulbs that go, because these are a whole lot nicer than the LCD projectors that you have to pull all the shades and turn off the lights in the room in order to see. And unfortunately, the money we had allocated for that in the referendum was actually eaten up by a lot of the extensive networking gear that we had to buy in order to support all the, well, everything that you see here, plus a lot of, the speakers on the walls and cameras and AP systems. So the wireless network, we expanded that a lot. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that is kind of falling into that. But what we want to do really is, we know there's a bunch of that stuff, and so we want to talk to the principals and get a better idea of what the priorities are for a lot of that.
Thank you. Regarding the online educator position, I would assume, tell me if I'm wrong, I would assume that if we're going to fund it this year, we're going to want to fund it for future years also. So I just want to make sure it's a recurring cost.
Yes, our plan with the online educators for that to continue. And the one change that I would say that we've seen in the last couple of years is, for a long time, most of that teaching occurred at the high school level, and now we have some online teaching occurring at the middle school level, and I would expect that only continues to grow in the years ahead. We don't have enough capacity for all the needs that we currently have, and there are times when we actually lose students to the McFarland Virtual School. I know that's not the name of it, but whatever their proper name is, because some students want to be in a fully online class or online plan, and we just don't have the staffing to make that happen.
Yeah, I wasn't questioning the need. It's just, I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that it's going to be ongoing.
Yeah, our plan, our recommendation is that it's ongoing. If you approved it this year, I guess you could approve it as ongoing, or you could approve it and ask us to bring it back again. But I guarantee it's going to be there in April of 2018, because the demand is strong.
My last question was regarding health insurance. I'm trying to remember the number that you gave us 2 weeks ago, Andy. I want to say it was like, if it's going to be, it's capped at 8 or 9% or whatever, 7. And we think it's going to be like 200,000.
Actually, the number, we looked it up actually after that meeting, I believe it's at 5.5%.
Okay.
Gina, and that would translate to about a $300,000 increase if that was implemented, the district's costs.
Right. So I just want to make sure that if we're not going to set aside any money this year to help ease the pain next year, that we're good with that.
I think that's part of our strategy here, is that by taking that $405,000 and only allocating that to one-time purposes, that it's going to be there for next year.
Okay.
Any more, Jeff? Barb, anything from you?
Just on the late bus, so it sounds like the concept is that this is going to be kind of a pilot this year to see how it goes, and then we'll
Correct.
deal with it next year. Okay.
Dan?
Just on that late bus thing, sounds like to me, that might be an ongoing thing, and it may, I don't know, we might think of it even in a more accurate term as part of ongoing expenses than a one-time thing, although I suppose it could turn out to be nobody uses it, and at that point, I guess we would save it for next year. In my mind, though, I'm thinking that as more of an ongoing thing. That's just a comment. Regarding the estimate for how much we're going to have, these numbers are very round numbers. How close are we to thinking that that's really what we've got? Is knowing what I know about you, Andy, I think that it's probably a low number for what's likely?
Yeah, we definitely rounded those a little bit. We didn't get down to the dollar or anything. We are very confident that we have the $450,000.
So with the interest amount, $35,000, if we don't add enough to our reserve, I can't remember the name of that, we're going to need to borrow every November, probably, right? Are we going to be paying that much in interest?
So the interest is actually interest revenue. Probably could have labeled that a little bit better. If you've watched your bank account, even though it's fairly anemic, we're not at 0.1% necessarily anymore. We're at a little bit higher. We're actually being able to capture about 1%, right around there, with our investments. And so instead of probably 0.2, 0.3 is what we were getting before. So that represents a $35,000 increase in ongoing revenue year to year. So that's what that represents. It's not interest savings, it's actually an additional interest revenue.
Just because of the fact that it's interest, in my head, I was saying, well, we're obviously going to pay more than what we're getting if we have to borrow every November for a month or so while we make our expenses. So
Yeah.
if, because of the fact that we might want to spend all of this $450,000, it might make us have to actually borrow an extra $450,000.
Except right now, we're not having to borrow. We're getting close to having to borrow, but we're not having to. And actually, our lowest point is actually that right after that first payroll in January, so right around January 10th is kind of our low point right now. A week or two after that, we get tax revenue, and so we're good again. November in the past, years ago, is where our low point is. Right now, it's in that January timeframe.
So in January, your projection is right now we're not going to have to borrow short term?
Not unless our spending does something strange between now and then. I do not project that, no.
And does it look like maybe next year it's going to be about the same, or?
I believe so right now, yes.
Okay. A question for Brian. Don't we offer full-time option for our online students right now?
Jim, do you want to respond? My sense is that we had very few students that were, I don't think we had any that were full-time, but I might get corrected.
We don't typically advertise that we provide full online education because it has been the exception rather than the rule at this point in time. We have had students who've exhibited a need, and it would have been a wonderful tool to have in our arsenal. Last year, 42% of OHS students completed an online or blended learning class, which is amazing when you consider the amount of staffing that is helping support that. When we take a student from OHS and they're learning not at school but off campus, it really requires a kind of oversight and supervision that was impossible to offer. And so the few times we offered it probably wasn't in the ideal situation without strong support, and we ended up finding other options that we could staff better. We're asking for a half-time position that, in some regards is going to be cost neutral because we end up having students who, for one reason or another, choose online learning options in other districts and then therefore take state funding with them. And so we think that working with Jen Schmidt, we would be able to provide oversight and guidance for this position that would be impactful for many of our students.
So, is this, okay?
Can I just add the middle school layer to that? We currently have one student who's fully online and another one that's probably going to fully online. What we see at our level is we're bringing in families who have been homeschooled, and they start to transition into the district through some online experiences, and then they start to set foot in our buildings, and then we sometimes see them go to the high school. So it's been meeting a need that I think we're continuing to see more and more of.
The reason I'm curious about this is because in my family, when we transitioned my kid off of the homeschool, we went to different schools with him, and we brought him from the homeschool scenario into the school district through online, and we just did specials at the school, and everything, all the academic courses were online courses at that time. And it's surprising to me, I guess, and that that's not something that we offer as a regular thing, to do all of your stuff online, except maybe the specials.
What I think the clarification, Jim is absolutely right that it's very limited at the high school level due to each accredited course that we have to offer. And given that I'm district-wide, we really started with the full-time online students being those kiddos that are kindergarten through 8th grade. And really, Shannon and I have kind of held the door kind of shut. Like, we want to make sure that these students are, high school ready, and we're really looking at exactly what we can offer and support. So kindergarten through 6th grade was huge as far as those kids that came in from homeschooling. Jessica Shrimp has been doing a fabulous job at supporting those students in their learning. And those kids are, I would say, fully online and at the same time fully Oregon students. If that all makes sense. So similar to what your kiddos did is exactly what was happening in the kindergarten through 6th grade, then 7th and 8th grade as they grew. And what Jessica has been able to do is provide an on-ramp. So those kiddos have been able to come in at when they're ready. And so what we really are doing is we're building a bridge for kids who are not feeling like they're ready to go into school, parents who maybe don't want to do that, traveling families, health issues. So we've had all of that going on. At the high school level, it's been much more difficult to do that, exactly what Jim was describing. It's very, very difficult to do at the high school without a designated staff person to do that.
So this is something that we've been doing at the younger grades, and all we're talking about here now is offering it more in the middle and high schools. Is that right?
Correct, because we have to have somebody that's kind of if you can kind of consider that person almost a case manager. So the person is coordinating between, for example, John Nedelkoff and a student, Amy Bailey and a student, and you just keep taking each Dave Ebert and a student, whatever subject matter it might be, and working with that teacher, that student, and the coursework, and making that all happen. The more layers you add and the less time the student is here, the more complicated it all gets, and assurance that credits are going to happen. And so that's where we've been like, we really want to make this the exception, not the rule. And now we're ready to take that a little bit broader, if that makes sense.
So if we approve this, then is that also going to come with a public announcement of the Oregon Online Academy, or I don't know, something similar? Or is it going to be kind of, we've got a new person and they're just going to continue to service our kind of low level, we don't talk about it type program?
The branding, we aren't, with the staffing that we're asking, a half-time position here, I don't believe we're advertising something that would be on par with McFarland's Virtual Academy. We're not looking to go wall to wall with bringing people from other districts on board with a half-time allocation. I think what we're looking to do is to provide, we could certainly through our guidance and through our typical scheduling processes, offer more opportunities for students to have. We wouldn't be advocating for people to not be learning in the building, but it would be another partner for our blended and our online options that are in-house, or some kids who might learn out of house for a portion of their day for whatever reason. But I don't see us as building in something that would rival what McFarland is doing at the moment.
So do you think with this new halftime position that we're going to be having more students do this, or just have the same students that have been doing this and wanted to do this get better services?
A little bit of both. I think it'll open more opportunity and it'll provide us, especially with students that need that adult coordination that currently we have not been able to provide it consistently, will benefit the most. There's a kind of a profile that we're looking for students that are able to succeed in that online setting. It isn't for everybody, and it's not easy. And so it without adult guidance, it can be just as rigorous and challenging as being in a classroom, but without a teacher. And that we don't believe is in anyone's best interest. So we really do need to provide somebody that can support.
So, of course, the evil with deciding where the money goes is that someone else doesn't get the money. So, Gina, I don't know if what were other staffing needs considered when deciding this particular ongoing expense? Can you address that at all?
Do you mean other needs than the online learning educator? Yes, we did. We looked at the list that we prepared last April, as well as looked at our ongoing needs. And the difficult part is that it's not an ideal time to add educators or people who support our students in the classroom. And so we felt that the more prudent approach would be to do the one-time expenses and then come back in April and look at what our staffing needs will be for next year.
Okay. Maybe I look at it a different way. I mean, this is a one-time thing, but this is going to be next year and the year after, and the year after, and the year after. So if we were considering something that we maybe could have used this year, but it's too late to get for this year, we could still use this money if we're going to use it an ongoing expense to get something that would happen next year and the year after and the year after.
True, but if you look at what we prioritized last April, this was our next in order of priority. And so we really feel if you look at the students that take advantage of our online programming, they don't have to be, but they can be our students that really need that as an option for things that are going on in their lives. So if you look at our most vulnerable learners, this is often an option that we can present to them. So we as a team felt that this was definitely next in line, and we have someone that we can increase her time to easily step into that role. So I don't need to view it from a recruitment standpoint of finding the best person, because we know at least we have one terrific candidate that will be part of that process. So as a team, this felt like this made the most sense to add this now. And since it was next in our priority, we were comfortable as a team knowing that that's money we won't have to spend next April, or we won't be able to spend next April on something else.
So would this position then work with all grades, or just be confined to the middle and high schools?
I'll look to Jen.
This particular position is geared to the high school.
Okay.
We have a we have a K-8 right now. This particular .5 is geared to the high school. There's another .5 that
I'm sorry to spend so much time, but is this position someone who would be expected to supervise all the classes for somebody who's online for their all of their classes, or just somebody who helps coordinate between the teachers and the various teachers and the students?
It's a mixed bag. They do a bunch of coordination between teacher and students, but they also provide direct support and coaching and progress monitoring to students along the way, as well as record keeping and making certain that we have kids signed up and enrolled in the proper programs, and that we're getting things to transcript in a timely fashion and they're reflected appropriately. So it's a pretty complex set of duties that it's part direct service to kids, it's part administrative as well.
So would this person be considered the teacher for any particular course? Like I don't know, ninth grade math or something?
It all depends on the course. There would be some courses that they certainly would be, and then there would be other things that may be outside of their certification that they'd be coordinating with others.
I'm going to give a quick example of like a perfect student situation. So we have a number of kiddos in this situation, but I'm thinking of a particular student who is currently taking classes online for some health things. And because of that, we have some very specific teachers who are working with online blended courses with that student to make sure that like instruction doesn't get interrupted. And then we have some other courses that would be more on along the lines of elective courses that we have an alt-ed certification. If we had that position, that alt-ed certification could jump in there and fill those spots. Does that make sense? So that would give that direct teacher-student relationship. We call it the TOR, the teacher of record. So the TOR for some things would be that teacher, very similar, if you can kind of think about Oasis, similar to that idea that you'd have that alt-ed teacher that would be the teacher of record of those things, and then you would have the classroom teacher that maybe is already working with the student, but they've now had to pull out of that class. That teacher, that would be a coordination. So everything that this position would do would be around the instruction provided for that student. So versus the kind of the external administrative things that I would continue that I take care of with ordering and vending and that kind of stuff. This would be direct instruction or have to do around that direct instruction provided to the student. That helps.
That's all I had on that. Thanks very much. Just another thing that I mentioned at the other, our last meeting is I would like to see some of one-time expenses being used for specifically alternative energy or things to help us be more efficient. Specifically, I think at RCI would be good because unlike any of these other programs, that kind of an investment pays for itself. It actually isn't like an expenditure. It's like investing in the future of spending less so that we would have more of this money left over next year to be able to use. So that if we put something like a solar array on the RCI's roof, it would not only help to teach kids and teachers who are there, but it would also pay us back in savings. So just as a general comment, I didn't see anything like that on here. The capital equipment budget might be used for something like that, but it's probably not enough to make a dent in a new solar array. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Tim?
Just quickly, Andy, on a little bit lighter side of things, about a quarter of the extra money is being spent on outdoor equipment, which we can all agree is part of the educational experience. And I know, having been on the PTO, for instance, at Netherwood, long time ago, that these fundraisers, like Brooklyn is doing now, to do some fundraising to replace their equipment, can leverage how far we can go. So I'm hoping that we don't move away from that, because I think it builds community support. I think it builds cooperation, certainly commitment to maintaining the equipment and things like that. Is this fund, this allocation, going to be a matching fund type program?
Yes, that's exactly how we framed it in our heads. We don't know what the allocations are. We don't know how we divvy out the $125,000 yet, but that is exactly what we talked about, is that it would be a dollar for dollar type match.
Anything else, Tim? Courtney? Krista?
I just have two quick informational. One is on the late bus. You said it was 2 buses. Is that, what breakdown is that, just for my information? Is it by grade level? Is it, or is it
No,
route?
we
or
were going to
it's-
put everybody, we haven't, to be honest, we haven't quite figured out all the details associated
Okay.
with that. What we envisioned was one bus kind of doing a north route and one bus doing a south route. We still do have the Spark routes going out, and we'll continue to keep those separate. That's for the younger elementary kids. So this would be more of a perhaps 5th through 12th, or probably more like 7th through 12th routes. But if there is a need at 5th and 6th grade, we'll figure something out and get those kids on there as well.
Great, thank you. And then just a quick technology question for John. Is all of the money allocated to building technology, or is there some that works with students that may need Wi-Fi access at home or equipment at home? So is it all static equipment here for the school, or is there some movement toward helping kids at homes that don't have Wi-Fi?
We hadn't considered that, partially because that's more of an ongoing expense rather than a one-time, because when you enter into that, it's basically like a monthly contract that you would be holding on to forever. With that said, I guess it would be possible to do sort of a pilot project or something for, a year or something to, try that out. That's something that we'd want to talk with the principals about and find out kind of where that fits into all of our priorities. So I'm certainly open to the idea. It just wasn't something that we had thought of because it's not exactly one-time money.
That's all. I have one question. Is we've got money allocated for professional development and then also for the online course, but we also have in General Fund 10 carryover balances, one in the department budgets and then one for virtual curriculum and high school curriculum. And Brian, my question is, how do those interplay? One of the things the board has looked at is, and we hear from Andy, is a significant amount of carryover from year to year, and the allocation's there to be used, and we want to make sure we're using it appropriately. And is the money that we're using for the 17-18 budget for these items something different than what it would be used for in the carryover budget or general fund 10 items?
Leslie, do you want to add a little detail to that? And I can get us started by saying we've had conversations about that $60-some thousand that continues to carry over for online curriculum and releasing that money to our general curriculum so Leslie has more flexibility to address teacher requests based on how they've been coming in.
That was a really good summary. I'm not sure what more I can add other than the fact that we've had that discussion. Because for the first year or two I was in this position, I was trying to hold true for the original intent for that fund. But I found that we've taken a direction that makes that fund, or the original purpose, not necessarily as useful as we thought it would be several years ago. Consequently, we were planning to use that for professional development components to sort of jumpstart our 5-day pathway system. Because as I mentioned before, one of our priorities is to develop our internal capacity to facilitate professional development. Consequently, we are working on a lot of systems to develop facilitators in areas where we've never had anybody to do it before, such as equity. And so there's an original, a little bit of an investment in that facilitator piece. So we would be using this one-time professional development money that we've been discussing for that, in addition to looking at how we could use that virtual course development money, since we haven't used it for its original purpose.
Thank you. That's all the questions I had. And so we're at the point where anybody else have any questions or clarifications of the proposal for the 17-18 adjustments? And just so everyone's clear, this is, the budget item solely is to allocate the $450,000. The next item would be the approval of the 17-18 budget. If that's approved, then we would approve the levy. But the first item before us would be to agree to the administrative recommendation as to the allocation of the $450,000. Is that correct, Brian?
Yes.
Okay, so any other questions on what the administrative proposal is? Jeff?
Just a quick clarification. There's 450,000 that we have that we didn't think we were going to have, but we're actually allocating 405, right?
No, it's this over here.
45 is for
45. That's it. Those are 5.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Thank you.
So everybody clear in terms of how we're going to proceed in terms of the motion? So seeing no other questions regarding the administration recommendations regarding prioritization, then it is the recommendation of the administration to allocate that as set forth in the memorandum to us. And so I'd entertain a motion to approve that recommendation or in any other form. Mr. Raymond moves approval of the administrative recommendation. Is there a second to that motion? Ms. Oderico with the second. This is time for discussion. Jeff, any discussion? Courtney? Dan?
I would like to see some of this money used for conservation and environmental purposes. I would suggest that instead of taking something like 20% off of each of these one-time expenses and allocating that to an environmental, maybe sinking fund that we can use to save money and further help educate our kids in the environmental area. Perhaps we could get a different recommendation from the administration that could include something for that. I wouldn't want to just say, hey, let's take a little bit out of each, because I don't know how that's going to work with the other possible proposals. But that is something that I would really like to see. It's one of the things that I really consider is important for one-time expenses, and this sounds like a great opportunity to keep moving that way.
Anything else in terms of discussion? Okay, Barb.
Oh, just as a follow-up on that, I'm just wondering if, Andy, you could talk to us a little bit about either this year or in the future, what you see as opportunities for capital investments for energy savings. I'm sure you've been thinking about it.
As I think I mentioned before, and we're actually on a race to get things done, we have about 130 kW system, solar system that's going on the roof right next to us at the high school. That's kind of where my focus is right now. I haven't really thought about where we would go next, other than we have had some very preliminary conversations with the architect that the next buildings that we build maybe could take another step in the direction of energy independence, if you would. But other than that, we do have some money in the capital equipment budget outside of this to put energy monitoring software like we do the middle school on the rest of our buildings. That's kind of another step I have too. I'd be very excited to spend some extra time to try to figure out where our next solar array would go, but we haven't spent that time yet.
Okay, so I guess my follow-up comment is, I guess I'm not real comfortable with making an allocation right now without having a good sense that you know what the best thing to do with that is. But I would really like to see for next year, if you have time, some more analysis of what our next steps would be in energy area.
Okay. I know one of the things that the Visioning Steering Committee is doing is working on a value statement that drives off of the environmental task force report, and that's the first step in the process, and that will likely encompass not only a statement regarding curricular needs with respect to the environment, but also the operational stuff. And once we get that approved, that will spin off, I think, a further conversation or discussion with Andy about what are the next steps that we'll take with respect to sustainability in the district. So I hear both of you, and I just given the sense of the conversations at the committee level, I believe that's where we're going to go, and so that will be on the plate for the next year plus. We got to get the current building projects kind of off the plate a little bit and closed out, and then start dreaming for the future with stuff. Anything else, Barb? Okay. Tim? Krista? Just a couple things. I'm really happy with how we're approaching the good budget situation we're in. Is that had been an interest of mine, as I had articulated several weeks ago, is about crafting this budget so we set up next budget for a win. And this does that with one-time money. We can look at personnel, but the funny part about school district budgeting is we're in October and we're almost halfway through the budget year, so we're kind of behind. I've talked with Brian a little bit about this, and we're going to talk with Gene about getting an overview of staffing. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is I don't have a good enough sense personally of where we're at, and I think we're really going to look and study that as we move forward with the potential growth. So I think you'll be seeing a little more of that look in terms of our budgeting over the next year. In terms of the proposals that are on the table, the late bus activities is something that we had batted around with respect to the equity issue and transportation. It segues really nice with our equity project and getting more kids involved in sports and other after-school activities. But it also is going to provide us with some information that's useful as we're moving through our conversations about the transportation and busing system. I just think we're going to learn a lot from that. So this, I think, going to be dollars well spent. With respect to the technology piece of that, and that had been in our plan for the referendum, and it kept getting chopped out. And given the fact you look around our schools, how connected we are, we've got to stay up to date with that. And I trust John's going to find a good way to spend that way that's going to be educationally beneficial. With respect to the playground equipment, our community's done amazing things in terms of supporting us. We keep asking for more and more money in terms of volunteers and donations and fundraisings. At some point you tap out and you get people really fundraiser exhausted, and I think this would be a great one-time way to say thank you to our community, to all those people who have supported projects for us, and to get the playgrounds that need to get updated, and that they're safe and that they're open for all of our students, because that's not necessarily the case right now. With respect to the online educator system, it had never been our intent to be McFarland. We purposely went into the whole virtual education knowing that's not where we went, and where we're going is simply amazing. And that's a big credit to you, Jen, and others who have helped. The fact that we're at 50% of our students, between 45 and 50% doing something online. I know when we talked about that 6 or 7 years ago, we said we're going to be there, and we said, are we really going to be at that level? And the fact that we're there is just amazing, and the fact that we can do more harkens to the need for having that online educator. So I'm really excited about that and moving that forward. So Brian, thanks to you and the administrative team for really a lot of hard conversations I know took place, because there are a lot of needs in our school, even though we have a lot of funds and a lot of wishes and dreams that had to be prioritized, and you guys did that in the context of your A team, and I know those weren't easy conversations. I will add one other point, and it derives from my experience as an attorney who does school work. I have been in several very small school districts in the last 3 weeks. that they can't afford paint in their hallways. And so the fact that we're sitting today with $500,000 to allocate so that we can look at next year's budget, that's a luxury that I think we as board members ought to appreciate, because people are trying to stay alive. I think administrators need to appreciate that, and I think our staff members need to appreciate how fortunate we are to be in a district that's on the winning side of the formula. And we need to do all we can as lovers of public education to get that formula changed. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Mr. Raymond? Ms. Oderico? Ms. Feeney? Ms. Flanagan? Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus? No. Mr. Zock?
Yes, motion carries 6-1. So we have prioritization, and that takes us to the approval of 2018 budget. Brian, that's Andy, right? Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So you see a format that's a little bit different than past years. Cara and I kind of took a step back, and we used to follow what's called the Meritorious Budget Award format, which had a lot of words in it, and it was a little bit dry. And so we tried to make this a little bit more exciting, a little bit more informative, with a little bit less wording, but yet still follow the format that the Department of Public Instruction allows or requires us to do. We just kind of chopped it up a little bit. So before you in your packet, you have our newest attempt to try to do that. And it's hopefully a little bit more readable. This is, after we've been kind of a little bit more in the details, this is more of a 50,000-foot document that kind of just shows some general things. So I have a few slides from that document that's in your packet that we can kind of talk through if my computer plays nice. So one of the new slides that we put in here was just kind of a general facts at a glance type thing, talking about personnel. Mr. Zock just mentioned we'll be spending a little bit more time, but we thought right in the front of the document we'd talk a little bit about personnel as a district and where our different categories are, and the number of employees, and then the FTEs that those translate to. So that's the majority of our school budget, which you'll see in a second, is staff. And so depending on which funds you include, you're in the 75% range or so with staff and salaries and benefits. Here's just another facts at a glance, kind of chopping things up a little bit, looking at headcount over about a 4-year period of time, and then the change that's happened in the last year. Headcount going up from 14-15 from 3825 to this year of 4047. So that's headcount, that's not FTE. That does include 4K students that are in our community partner schools. And we are counting every child as a 1.0, even though they might only attend school 0.5 or 0.6. Expenditures, you actually see all funds expenditures going down. That's because we're not, last year was a big spend year for all of our construction. So the reason that it's going down by that $18 million is because we only have about $6 million left to spend out of that fund starting on July 1st of this year. And then revenues, which is probably more of a better indication of kind of what's going on with the budget, because you don't have that specific issue of spending down those proceeds. You can see that we did increase quite a bit this last year by the $2.8 million. And that's all funds, so that includes multiple funds. State aid, we talked about that a little bit earlier this year, specifically when the state aid estimate came out. We're looking at a little bit of a decrease there. Specifically, that's because of the values of our properties are increasing, and because the state didn't put additional dollars into the state aid formula. So when you run that those variables through the formula, it does show a little bit of a decrease in state aid this year, down less than $20 million. Our levy goes up partially because our state aid went down, and partially because we have a little bit more spending authority because we have additional students. And then our levy rate's going down a little bit, and the main factor there is because of our assessed values going up. We have a strong assessed value increase. A lot of that's driven by additional property, which is nice because you're spreading the property taxes over more people. And then our equalized value obviously is directly connected to that levy rate. And we had a strong increase of 6.1%. We just broke out Fund 47 from the numbers above, down below, just so you could kind of see what was going on. And that's kind of driving some of the numbers obviously up above, specifically on the expenditure side, that we have the $6.4 million left to spend this year. Just a quick chart, you've probably seen this before. Where's our money come from? Two main sources for the most part for our school district, property taxes and state aid. You can see that property taxes are kind of overcoming state aid a little bit as our property values increase. That's typically what happens. So we're at 44% property tax, 41% state aid. This is just Fund 10. And then Cara grabbed this quote out of the information. 85% of districts' fund revenues come from state aid and property taxes, so the majority of our funds come from that way. And then we do have 5% now that are funded by open enrollment, and per pupil aid, which is where we got additional funds this year, is up to 4%. So per pupil aids is basically that dollar amount that Dr. Bussler mentioned before of the $200 that we're getting this year and the $204. That's on top of a couple $100 that has grown over the last several years. So they're basically funding this categorical aid rather than our general aid program that we've traditionally been funded through. This is just a quick graph of what's going on with our equalization aid. And you can see where we're kind of bouncing around a little bit. As I mentioned again, part of the issue here is that our property values are increasing. The state's not putting additional funding into that state aid formula, so that's why we went down this last year. You can also see that 188 of the school district increased in aid and 230 decreased. So we were one of those 230. 4 actually remained completely unchanged. So we talked about what makes up the budget, and this is one of the ways that we can chop it up. This is just Fund 10, which is our main general operating fund for the school district. And you can see that salaries and benefits are a significant part of them. Looks like we're in the 70% range for those things. And then we have services, and when you drop up services, that's anything from custodial cleaning at evenings to utilities to transportation. Those are all services. So that is a fairly large chunk of the pie as well. Operating transfers, we're going to show you what that means in a second, but that 10% that's there, that's kind of the fourth largest slice of the pie, and I'll show you that in a second here. Debt service, this is important, especially since we're thinking about potentially going in the future to needing a referendum again for capacity reasons. You can see that we do have an opportunity this next year that we're actually going to be reducing our principal and interest payments by around $500,000. And then that stays flat until those funds are actually paid off. So that's nice, because a lot of times when you approve referendum payments, you kind of build with your assessed values, with the assumption that your assessed values are increasing. We took a very conservative stance when we built the current referendum debt service schedule, and we went flat, so that we do have some capacity as our district grows and becomes assessed values increase because of no additional housing and stuff. That will help us. Excuse me, that will help us not have as significant of an impact that otherwise may have with whatever our solution is for that capacity, dealing with that capacity issue. This is non-referendum debt service. Again, something to keep in mind. We do have a reduction coming in a couple years related to two things. Our roofing project that was bonded for with 0% interest loans back when the government was trying to kind of kickstart the private enterprise and stuff. We borrowed $500,000 at 0% interest and put a roof on the middle school. Those payments are ending in 2 years, as well as the payments for the first phase of J.C. Park East improvements. So those will be going down. You'll see that dropping in 2019. And then there's a few more years out in WRS payments for our unfunded liability. I know that's a mouthful. Basically, a number of years ago, over 20 years ago, I believe, WRS looked at what was going on in our account for our employees and noticed that there was an unfunded liability there. They started assessing additional contributions to compensate for that, but they weren't doing it very fast, and they were requiring us to pay 8% interest. So about in 2002, I believe it was, we determined that it would be cheaper to go borrow that money than pay 8% interest to ETF. And I think at the time it was anticipated that we'd save $10 million over the course of paying those things, that unfunded liability off. We are now, and then after 10 years, in 2009, I believe it was, or no, I'm sorry, 2012, yep, we identified another time that we could lower interest payments again. Those bonds were callable after 10 years, and we saved another $600,000 in interest costs because interest rates were lower. So all total, about $11 million in savings. The nice thing about this is within the revenue cap. So once those payments are gone, we can utilize those payments for other things within our district. Budget summary, this is kind of what I affectionately have called over the years kind of my favorite page because it tells you what's going on in one page. And we're going to talk a little bit about that operating transfer out and in thing. You see that we start our fund balances on the left-hand side, we add our revenues, we subtract our expenditures. We have this thing called transfers, which is basically a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. Fund 27 is our fund that works with our students with special needs. That fund was never designed to be a standalone fund. It was actually designed to have a transfer from Fund 10. DPI a number of years ago decided that any revenues and expenses that are related to special needs students will go into one specific fund, and then if there's a gap between revenues and expenses, Fund 10 would just have to pay for that. And so that's what that almost $5 million transfer is, and that represents in the Fund 10 graph that we looked before, the 10% number that was there. You'll see then the fund balance at the end of the year. You'll see a number of funds that have zeros. That's because they're mandated at the end of the year to have zeros. So Fund 27 it should have a zero fund balance at the end of the year. It does not carry a fund balance. So that $4.9 million, I can guarantee you, will not be a $4.9 million transfer. It will be some number different so that we can get to zero when we're done. Typically, it's been a little bit less than what we've estimated in the budget, which obviously helps Fund 10. Donations, gifts, funds, that is a fund that make you think that we receive a tremendous amount of money in donations and gifts, and we do, but we also run our student activities out of there. And that has to do with, again, some DPI guidance about, used to be called agency funds, which aren't even on the sheet anymore. We still do have them, although they're very small. This is a requirement that DPI said is because those funds don't have officers in a traditional sense, we run it through Fund 21. It's not a Fund 10 expense, it's standalone, and that's where they kind of plotted it, put it for us. Talked about special education. We talked a little bit about our non-referendum debt fund and how that will go down. Non-referendum debt and debt service, you can see that there's some negatives there on the end, deficiencies for a year basis. Don't worry about that. That has to do with the timing of making sure that the money's in the account for when the payments happen. And so the levy and expenditure schedules are a little bit different. And so that's just a normal cash flow thing. Those funds have more fund balance in them. You can see that there's non-referendum debt that has $55,000 in it. By the time that we're done with this, the idea is that fund will have zero in it, but it is spending a little bit more than it's accepting right now because there is a fund balance there. Same thing with the debt service fund, Fund 39. We talked about referendum bond fund, that's Fund 47. Basically, we have to have those funds spent by the end of this year. Actually, we believe sometimes in March. So that's going to happen. Food service fund, we are budgeting a small decrease in fund balance there because we're making a little bit more significant capital investments in that fund this year. That fund is not supposed to have a huge balance in it. It's supposed to kind of grow and then invest into the equipment that needs to happen, and so that's what's happening there. Fund 70s are two main funds there. Those are funds related to employee trusts. We have a sick leave conversion trust fund there, and then we have our OPED trust funds. Those are basically there to help our employees with insurance costs and post-retirement, and help the district fund our commitment to those employees for post-employment benefits. And then funds 82, 85, 80, 82, and 85, that is our pool, performing arts center, and community ed fund. That fund now is also required to have a 0% or zero number at the end of the year. And so that's what we're trying to budget. It should not have a balance from year to year. And the majority of that money is actually our community ed services that we provide. There is a small amount in there for pool and the Performing Arts Center, because those things have to be only community-based funded. Lastly, our cooperative purchase fund is very, very small, but it's basically, and I'm going to forget, Carl Perkins grant. We are the administrative agent for a number of school districts in the area for that grant, and that's the majority of it. There is also our Badger Conference. We are the administrative agent for the Badger Conference Athletic Conference, and so we run those funds. Districts provide us some funding, and we're able to provide the commissioner and the assistant commissioner and with payments. Carrying on quickly, just a quick graph of what's happened with our assessed values. You can see that in 2009 through 2013, we were experiencing negative assessed values, but we are coming back fairly strong over the last 4 years. And then really the next slide is really for the next agenda item, but I'm happy to answer questions if you have any about the budget at this time.
Anybody have any questions before we entertain a motion? Any questions on the 2017-2018 budget as presented by Andy? Krista? Tim? Barb? Courtney? Jeff? Dan? No. Okay, nor do I. We'll entertain a motion. Then the recommendation is to approve the 2017-2018 original budget as presented by Andy Weiland. It's been a long process over the last 6 months, so I'd entertain that motion to approve the budget as presented this evening. Ms. Feeney with the motion, is there a second? Mr. Raymond with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Andy, thank you. I'd like the format a lot.
Good.
It's really good.
I will say that we had a little problem with some of the, trying to get the colors a little bit more vivid. We're going to work on that, but we're trying to improve the readability of things a little bit.
And so Carolyn, if you want to understand the budget, this is homework for you, because it's, but it's for any member of the public who was watching tonight or would like a copy and wants to understand how we budget. This is a really good primer in terms of where our money goes, and it's available at the district office if folks want that. Just contact Ms. Wick. So we have a motion to approve the budget as presented this evening. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Mr. Raymond? Yes. Ms. Oderico? Yes. Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun? Yes. Mr. Zock?
Yes, that motion carries. We have an approved budget by 7-0 vote. Thanks, Andy, for all your work and your team on putting this together. We're in a good situation. I think we've set us up next year, in a good way to move forward. So, thanks.
You bet.
Next on our agenda is item D4, which is 2018-2019. Oh, yeah. Gee, we have to tax folks for this, don't we? I was trying to get away from that. Sorry about that. I had lost my agenda somewhere amongst my papers. The budget that we have just approved requires a tax levy of $26,167,000, $167,252, and I need a motion to approve a levy in that amount. Mr. LeBrun with the motion, is there a second? Second. Ms. Flanagan with a second, any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Ms. Oderico?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Zock?
Yes, that motion carries by a 7-0 vote. Now we can move on to the 2018-19 calendar, and is that Gina or Krista? Krista, floor is yours.
Okay. Spoiler alert is we don't think we're there yet. So I'm just going to try and be a little succinct here. On the surface, the calendar seems pretty easy, but it's actually pretty complex because we have a window within which to work. We know that via state law, we cannot start school before September 1, so that puts us in the start date of September 4. And so that's when we can start, and then as we move through the school year, and as you've looked at calendars A and B, and we really want to thank the students, families, and teachers for participating in the survey. That's really, really beneficial information for us, and we use it. And it's really helpful in terms of us balancing what we believe is the best way to educate our students, as well as balance what challenges families have in terms of calendars and vacations and work. So we take that really seriously. We know that there are certain things associated with the calendar that are givens. We now have a teacher contract that's 190 days, so we need to look at that. But we really feel like the two sticking points for us is when is professional development scheduled throughout the year, in August, as well as throughout the year, and then what the end of the school year looks like for grades 9 through 12. As we look at when has graduation traditionally been in this community, which is the second Sunday in June, but then also looking at, what does that end of school year look like for families. So we are coming forth with a recommendation tonight that we take the calendar back to Leslie for viable options that will come to policy for PD in terms of when those days are throughout the school calendar and what they look like, and then for the high school leadership team to come back to us with viable options for what the end of the school year looks like for grades 9 through 12.
Gina, anything to add to that? Okay. So there's no motion from policy and no motion on the table, and what I'm hearing is you'd like to proceed and with consideration of that and report back at further time.
Yeah, and our timeline would be that would come to policy. We'll schedule a special meeting again at 5 o'clock before the November 27th board meeting, and then we would come with a motion for the board for the November 27th meeting.
Okay. Any questions of Krista? Okay. We will move on from there. I think just more information, more dialogue is a good thing to balance those needs. We've talking about that within the context of our current calendar limitations within times, and I foresee that we'll be looking at calendar in a much broader context in the next several years. So, and Carolyn, I'm going to put you in touch with Krista and Gina so that we can kind of coordinate input from you and the student council and the students to them as they consider this for a recommendation to us. Okay, good. Item D5 is from Vision Steering Committee, the sustainability value statement. We're not ready for that. We're going to work on that again at our next meeting, so I would anticipate that you'll see that in November sometime. Okay. Good. So that moves us to discussion items E, committee reports from policy. Anything other than the calendar, Krista?
We do have one more. It has to do with our foster care policy, and so we do have a motion to approve an amended foster care policy, and the only change is that the requirement from DPI is that we have the name of one of our staff persons as the foster care liaison. We can't just have a position, and so that is changed from Cynthia DiCamelli to Teresa Nicholas.
Point of order is whether we can take action on that, because that's not in any of the action items?
Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm assuming that's not an issue. I mean, if we had a timing issue, we can do a short morning meeting with 4 of us if we had to. Okay. Vision Steering Committee, Jeff?
We met last week to discuss sustainability value statement as well as transportation changes. And we're going to continue both of those discussions in November on the 15th, as well as a report from the Youth Sports Task Force.
Thank you. And I sat in on the Vision Committee meeting, and the discussion on transportation is ongoing and very complex. Just like the calendar has a lot of moving parts, the transportation component does as well. And we're getting a lot of good feedback and input on that. Moving to agenda area F, informational items. I've got a couple because I forgot to mention those. During the consent calendar, we had a couple donations. One is from the People's Church United Methodist Faith Community that donated slightly over $1,600 for Netherwood Knoll Arboretum through their Mission of the Month for September, which is a really generous donation. And then the Coral Boasters donated a new stereo to Prairie View Elementary. Those are both generous donations, and we thank both of those organizations for their support of the Oregon School District. Brian, informational items, November 30th open house. I think probably all 3 of these are yours. Andy's got the
Andy's
concern.
going to do number 2.
Okay, so why don't you lead off with the open house?
Just real quickly, I know you have a save the date on your calendar for Thursday, November 30th from 4 to 7 p.m. That's going to be our open house tour and celebration here at Oregon High School. Additionally, we have been working with Kristen Milsna at Findorf, and we will send out the final referendum update, capital construction update, in a newsletter to all community members, which will include an invitation on the November 30th date. So that takes care of that. I'll pass school construction lots off to Andy.
Just before it goes there, it looks really cool. I can't wait to the windows and the new commons here is going to be pretty amazing. So I've had a lot of people ask me, when can we get in and take a tour of that? So, Andy.
You bet. So the school construction lots, you may be familiar with our school construction project. We do one every year. And when we're lucky enough and lots become available, in the past we've bought more than one just to kind of have them locked up for a number of years. It allows us to plan a little bit better. It reduces a little bit of work on Chris and my part, trying to work through legal and all those types of things. So what we're proposing right now is to purchase 3 lots in the new development that the infrastructure is going in over on the west side, over by the West Side Parks. Is everybody kind of familiar where that is? So we have 3 lots. Those lots are nice lots. They're in a wooded subdivision, so the lots are not what you would call frugal type of a lot. They're fairly expensive lots. We're in the $100,000 range for those lots. So we are looking at 3 of them. The plan is to work through and negotiate with the developer here in the next week or 2. And then we were hoping to have a special meeting in the electorate, the second meeting, in conjunction with the second meeting in November, to get approval to purchase those. And then the hope is to hopefully close on those lots by the end of the calendar year. So if there's any questions or thoughts. Yep.
Just for context, Andy, what have we typically spent on a lot for that project?
Over the last several years, we're typically in that mid-90s, $90,000 range. So we're not that much higher, but we're a little bit higher than we have been.
Krista?
Just one quick thing. I had an email from a citizen wondering if that was construction lots for a new school that we're building. So maybe we want to change, since we're looking at growth task force, we may want to change the verbiage we're using.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
School construction.
I have a question.
Yeah, Tim.
Is there some kind of volume benefit? Why 3 lots, considering all the development going on around town?
Yeah, I mean, I think there hasn't been a significant amount of lots being opened up in Oregon, and they're decent lots that Chris feels we can build on. I think part of it is just having having the knowledge that they're locked up. They really don't cost us much anything once we have them, because they are property tax exempt once they're owned by us. So, and we're not sure that they're gonna really have yards, so we probably won't have to mow them over that, in that woods. It's more of just a locking them up and knowing that we have a place to go and not having to worry year to year. This last year, for instance, we were kind of pushing into the spring to have a lot that creates problems for Chris trying to design the house and those types of things.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, Brian, the superintendent's report.
A couple of quick items. I know most of you, I believe, received this journal from Wisconsin School News. I hope you had the opportunity to read John Ashley, the executive director of the WASB. He wrote an article on engaging students as a first step, and I thought that was just a terrific back-to-school message. I was going to bring it last month and share it. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at it, it is worth your while to take a quick review. Secondly, Kelly Massey, one of our fourth grade teachers at Brooklyn Elementary School, had the opportunity to share on behalf of the entire Brooklyn Elementary School a Brooklyn Goes Green and Healthy presentation at Rotary this last Tuesday. I will tell you it was exceptionally well received, showing what Dan had mentioned earlier in terms of our environmental movement and how alive that is in our school district. You would have been very proud of her presentation. Next item, we held a district flu shot clinic this last week, and Gina and Andy, how many school staff, do you have a number? Is that up, down, or about the same? So it is flu season. If you haven't picked up your flu shot, make sure and get it. Of course, I missed it because I had scheduled a bunch of meetings, so the very next day I was able to get my flu shot. The next item is a sad item, and I think many of you are familiar with Mike Way. I will hand in both directions the card from his visitation and his funeral. If you're not familiar with Mike, he was a longtime teacher and technology director in the Oregon School District, and he passed away about a week and a half ago. You might remember meeting Mike when we did the tour here at Oregon High School. He and his wife Judy, Mike's a retired administrator. He came to the retired administrator and board member tour, and he and Judy had an opportunity to walk through Oregon High School, and of course he was amazed at how it had transformed since his days in the Oregon School District. My next item, Leslie was working with a local group, and I know you're familiar with the STAR program that we use in education. We hosted a STAR training program right here in the Innovation Center for Southern Wisconsin school districts, and we had Oregon faculty at that training. Again, another reason why when we have this great facility, we want to make sure and utilize it as much as possible. Speaking of great facilities and utilizing another state, this happens to be a statewide conference that Shannon will be hosting. She didn't know she was hosting it, but it's at her school, at Oregon Middle School this week. It's the Healthy Schools Conference on Friday. This happens to be a statewide conference, so it will be a large event. You know, my seventh item is the parent-teacher conference time. We are right in parent-teacher conference season. Oregon High School 2 weeks ago had their parent-teacher conferences, and this week Brooklyn and Netherwood will have their parent-teacher conferences. I didn't know I was going to say this, but after Steve just reminded us all about the benefits of being in a school district that's growing, it caused me to reflect, and I think it's important that we reflect on the fact we get to have a conversation about adding budget monies in October. There are a lot of school districts, and I was part of a school district during some very challenging budget times that was not increasing enrollment. In fact, graduating kids that were more kids than the kindergarten and first grade classrooms coming in. And I think it's easy to forget that there's another side to Wisconsin public school funding, and that other side is very dark and very dreary because schools frankly don't have the money for paint. They don't have the money to add a third bus or 2 additional bus routes for a late bus activity. They don't have the money to lower class sizes. And we have it really, really good. And it also, I think, gives us a responsibility to speak to our state legislators about the challenges that public school funding has and how we get to an equitable public school funding format for all 430 school districts, because many school districts just cannot do the things, they'd like to do the things we're doing, but they cannot do the things we're doing because of their financial changes or challenges. Then my last item, I think Steve may know this, so if not, I hope I can surprise him, and for that matter, surprise all the school board members. The Wisconsin Association for Talented and Gifted in the state of Wisconsin has recognized the outstanding school board for 2017, and you might know some of those you might know the outstanding school board. It happens to be the Oregon School District. So to the 7 of you, congratulations. You are recognized on a statewide basis. Amy Miller made the recommendation on your behalf, and there's a special recognition at their fall conference in, I believe it is November 17th. So if any board members are interested in attending, just let me know. And the luncheon is at 11:30 at their conference, and I know there's a luncheon meal and a recognition and likely a photo opportunity for you as well. But obviously not because you're my employers, but you are a very, very deserving board and something that you can be exceedingly proud of, to be recognized on a statewide basis and also to be nominated by school staff. So you clap for a lot of people, and all of us are going to clap for you. That concludes my report.
Moving to closing future agenda, you've got a draft of the November 13th agenda before you. On there's 18-19 calendar. That's likely going to be the second meeting in November, not that first one, so we'll remove that. We'll be looking at, we get the student achievement reports are the big part of that,
Yes.
that presentation. So
Yes.
we'll have it, pardon? Yeah, and foster care policy from the policy committee. So we'll spend some significant time with the student achievement reports and walking through those, looking forward to seeing them and all the work that we know that has gone into that. If any board member has any item that they want placed on the agenda, please contact me or Brian, we'll do that. So, any questions about the agenda on the 13th?
We will also figure out a better phrase for school construction lots, so we don't confuse people with that whole issue.
Do you think we'll have the public hearing, we'll be in a place to have it then at that meeting?
I'm hoping, but
Okay.
we gotta look at our publication guidelines and stuff.
Sure.
We have to be
Or maybe the last
pretty
one.
close.
Okay, good. So that takes us to checkout. Barb, I'm going to walk through this. Nothing? Tim? Krista?
I just have one quick thing, and I think it goes to the point of what we do really matters to students. We had a meeting for Friends of Oregon School District at one of the elementary schools, and so we asked teachers, tell us what the barriers are and how we can help. And this goes to us passing a budget for a late activity bus. A lot of people think late activity buses are for athletics only. Well, this student in particular, the story we heard was having trouble in school, not achieving. And so one of the teachers made it possible for this student to go to a coding class after school for community ed. The kid was lights out, clearly the best kid in the class for coding, but he can't continue because he has no ride home. So us having a late activity bus, a light has shown for that kid, and he's going to be able to continue in coding, and that may be a future career for him, but a late activity bus is going to make a difference.
Thank you, Krista. Courtney? Jeff? Dan? No. I just have one thing to share is I was invited to be a judge down in Brooklyn by the PTO for their chili cook off and taste off. So I tasted a couple of Fridays ago 17 different chilies. And would you tell number 8 that I want a quart of number 8's chili? Because that was the best one. It was a total. Yeah, that was really good. So, but tell your PTO thank you very much. It was just an enjoyable evening down there fundraising, and the kids were just wild. They were in the gym dancing and having a really good time. I got out of there as fast as I could after I got the challenge. It was just wild. So, hey, we've got a budget for the next year. It's a really good budget. It was a great process. We've got a chance to really make a difference in kids' lives. Thank you to the administrators and teachers that are here tonight, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Kraus with the motion. Mr. Raymond with the second. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:08. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a couple weeks.